Good evening, and welcome to this event hosted by the VUB and the ULB and the Institute of European Studies of both universities. I'm really honored to moderate this evening discussion on academic freedom and democracy in Hungary, an event convened by two universities which, as the name proudly attests, are committed to critical thinking and, as they say themselves, hold freedom of thought as their insignia. I warmly thank their rectors, Caroline Pauwels and Yvon Englert, for their presence on this panel. Our keynote speaker will be Michael Ignatieff, the rector and president of the Central European University, CEU, a Hungarian-American university accredited in both countries, which has been founded in 1991 in Budapest to support the region's transition from communist dictatorship to democracy, and has since grown into a reference of liberal thinking and a center of academic excellence in Hungary and in the region. I don't really have to introduce Mr. Ignatieff. He has a distinguished career as a writer and an academic, in particular at Harvard University, where he was director between 2000 and 2005 at the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy, and more recently as the Edward Murrow Professor of the Practice of the Press, Politics and Public Policy. He has also been a journalist and a politician as the leader of Canada's currently ruling Liberal Party. I just recall that in the last 4 decades, his reflections, couched in a succession of thought-provoking books, from Blood and Belonging to The Warrior's Honor, from human rights as politics and idolatry to The Lesser Evil, from a biography of Isaiah Berlin to a political memoir, Fire and Ashes, have intellectually and sometimes controversially framed the aspirations, the doubts, the tensions, and the dilemmas of political liberalism, the global human rights community, and journalism. Hungary will be the focus of this evening's discussion, but the case of Hungary can't be dissociated from the European Union. It's no coincidence that we are here hosted by the Institutes of European Studies. It can't be isolated either from a global and increasingly connected world. We are living, to borrow from Timothy Gordon Ash, the Isaiah Berlin Professor Fellow at Oxford, we are living in a cosmopolis which provides today the realistic context for any discussion of free speech or academic freedom. And in this cosmopolis, as most barometers of world freedom attest, headwinds are blowing against the most fundamental values of liberty, free inquiry, and openness. I will add that academic freedom is not a luxury or a professor's privilege. It is both a proxy for democratic values and of intrinsic importance in its own right, say Anne Corbett and Clay Gordon of the London School of Economics. Universities, they add, need the autonomy, the freedom, and the authority to educate their students, to be active members of society, and to carry out cutting-edge research, which will enable us to find solutions to an increasingly complex set of issues. They also need protection from arbitrary interference. There are basic conditions for the effective functioning of higher education, which intrinsically depends on a spirit of openness, tolerance, inquiry, and respect for diversity to do its work, the very values that underpin the democratic societies in which we aspire to live. End of quotation. Last October, the Canadian newspaper of record, the Globe and Mail, suggested that Michael Ignatieff was, and I quote, safely back in academia after a period of life devoted to Canadian politics, only to quickly add the new post he begins this fall as president and rector of the famed Central European University in the Hungarian capital of Budapest is about as politically charged as there is right now in the world of academia. The author of the Globe and Mail article was right. In early April, the Hungarian parliament adopted a new legislation on higher education, which has been widely interpreted as a direct attack against the CEU, although the Hungarian government strongly denies it, and even as a political vendetta against the founder and funder of the CEU, George Soros, the Hungarian-born US financier and philanthropist whose liberal views inspired in Karl Popper's Open Society are, to say the least, at odds with the current Hungarian government's ideology and agenda. The law, sometimes dubbed the Lex CEU, has raised a storm of reactions. In Hungary first, where tens of thousands of people have demonstrated in the street, but also internationally. The US State Department, the Academic Freedom Network, Scholars at Risk, the European University Association, the European Students' Union, the VUB and the ULB and others have criticized the measures. Europe must not be silent when civil society, even academia, as now at Central European University in Budapest, is deprived of the air to breathe, said German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. The European Commission, which is the guardian of the EU treaties, is currently assessing the conformity of the amendments to the higher education law with EU law. And Frans Timmermans, the EC's vice president in charge of fundamental rights, should be reporting back before the end of April. According to its opponents, the Lex CEU is not just an attack against one institution and one man. It's not a Trump-esque quirk, a flash in the pan, a moment of aberration. In fact, writes Lydia Gall, Human Rights Watch researcher in Budapest, the CEU represents everything that the Hungarian government considers as a threat: critical thinking, liberal values, and academic freedom. To many observers who have been following Viktor Orbán's government since the crushing electoral victory of 2010, is just another stage in a carefully planned political project which has led, in the words of renowned Hungarian-American journalist and author Kati Marton, to an authoritarian descent. Since 2010, indeed, to the bafflement of many in Brussels and in Washington, the former anti-Soviet dissident, the former pro-Western liberal, has been reshaping Hungary, transforming the country into an illiberal democracy, as Viktor Orbán himself confessed. The choice of words used to qualify the current Hungarian government remains controversial. Michael Ignatieff, for instance, if I trust an interview in the Globe and Mail, refuses the often made comparison between Mr. Orbán and Mr. Putin. But a number of reports from human rights organizations, press freedom groups, and members of the European Parliament have severely impugned a succession of measures, policies, and declarations which they consider as an assault on the EU's most fundamental values, and in particular of the European Charter of Human Rights. The attitude of the Hungarian government in the so-called refugee crisis has crystallized these judgments. For many, it has created a parting of waters between two radically different ideas on what Europe is and what it should stand for. Judy Dempsey of the Carnegie Europe summarized it as the Merkel way versus the Orbán way. European leaders, she said, face a stark choice. They can go their own way at the risk of destroying the EU, or they can pull together to restore the bloc's ambition and confidence. The Hungarian case raises indeed crucial issues for the EU. Viktor Orbán, Patrick Kingsley writes in The Guardian recently, seeks what he calls a counter-revolution in the EU, greater autonomy for nation states, and less emphasis on liberal and humanitarian principles. For those who have raised the alarm over Hungary in the last years, it tests the EU's principles, it challenges its capacity and its will to call upon member states to uphold those values enshrined in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. It questions its ambition to really create a union where the defense of common values trumps the crude affirmation of national sovereignty and identity. Let me quote Dutch political scientist Cas Mudder, and a former CEU professor. It should be clear by now, he writes, that Orbán's actions are not merely a domestic affair. First of all, Hungary is a member of the EU and should respect its laws. Second, Hungary has become a bellwether for illiberal democracy in Europe and an inspiration for illiberal democrats throughout the region. Hence, the struggle of a CEU is not just about that unique university, it's about all universities, and it's about liberal democracy. This judgment is sans appel, as we say in French, but drawing their own conclusions from Viktor Orbán's unruffled challenges to the EU, many consider that the EU has not been up to the challenge. that it has shown a lack of courage and political will. It has caved in, limiting itself to legalistic infringement proceedings instead of triggering the rule of law mechanism, an instrument which is supposed to ensure the member states respect the criteria that they have promised to uphold when they join the EU. True, there have been at times a serious discussion of the Hungarian case in the EU institutions. Lines in the sand have been drawn in the European Parliament, with the Liberals, the Greens, the left, trying to kick the EU into action, and on the other side, center-right and right-wing parties opting for a soft line or even an endorsement of Viktor Orbán's policies. Fidesz, the Hungarian ruling party, belongs to the European People's Party, the largest group in the hemicycle, and although there have been signs of impatience and irritation in its ranks, the EPP has not yet withdrawn its imprimatur. The attack on the CEU, as I mentioned earlier, can be seen exclusively in the Hungarian context. We are in a cosmopolis, and the remarks which Lee Bollinger, the president of Columbia University, made a couple of years ago on press freedom can be applied to academic freedom. When the rights of foreign media are curtailed, he wrote, our rights are threatened everywhere. That's what globalization means. It is in an increasingly interconnected global society, censorship anywhere can become censorship everywhere. Now, academic freedom is under pressure in many countries. In authoritarian states, of course, which see such freedom as antithetical to their arbitrariness and their bigotry, is also targeted by so-called non-state actors, religious fundamentalists in particular, who often benefit from official or societal complacency and impunity. Attacks on higher education communities are occurring at an alarming rate around the world, threatening the safety and well-being of scholars, students, and staff, writes the Scholars at Risk Network in its 2016 Free to Think report. Those attacks, it continues, shrink the space in which everyone is free to think, question, and share ideas. But all democracies are not safe either. In the current age of populism, marked by the narcissism of minor differences, as Michael Ignatieff characterized it, by anti-intellectualism, by the rejection of expertise, the distrust of facts, and the derision of reason, in a world flooded by intemperate social media, in societies where free speech is threatened by terrorist thugs, hecklers' veto, or even well-intentioned defenders of intercultural dialogue, academics and academic freedom, that means the defense of uninhibited, robust, and wide-open thinking, inquiry, and speech, are more needed and more relevant than ever. These are challenges that we cannot afford to lose. This evening on the ULB campus is in fact also an act of solidarity with the CEU, of course, but also with all those academics everywhere in Iran, Egypt, Iraq, Pakistan, Syria, Venezuela, Bangladesh, etc., who are victims of censorship, intimidation, and sometimes death. Liberal principles are of little meaning unless one is prepared to risk one's survival in that defense, Michael Ignatieff wrote in his biography of Isaiah Berlin, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. And in this graceful book published in 1998, he quotes a Berlin sentence which has a special resonance in today's troubled times and which might inspire today's discussion. Unless there is some point at which you are prepared to fight against whatever odds, Berlin said, and whatever the threat may be, not merely to yourself, but to anybody, all principles become flexible, all codes melt, and all ends in themselves for which we live disappear. In short, the ivory tower is no place to be to defend academic freedom. Now, without further ado, I give the floor to Michael Ignatieff, who someone suggested that year was safely back in academia. Thank you.
Good evening. It's a great pleasure to share this platform with the recteur Englert of the Université libre de Bruxelles, and it's a great honor to share it with Rector Pauwels. Before we came on, she was giving me instruction on how to pronounce the word free in her language, and I didn't do very well, but vrai? Vrai. It's an important word tonight. Whatever language you speak, vrai or libre, that's what we're talking about, academic freedom. And it means a lot to me that the rectors from two great universities in this city are sharing the platform. I also learned today that the Université catholique de Louvain has sent us a message of support, and that joins, get this, over 650 letters that we've received from universities around the world supporting us, and we've also received the support of 24 Nobel laureates in the last week. So it's been, it's been an extraordinary experience to feel the support of the international academic community. And it's also very nice to see you here. Je suis Canadien, alors je parle un peu de français. S'il y a des questions en français, je ferai mon mieux à répondre. But I think I'm going to use the lingua franca of Europe. How long will this be, the lingua franca of Europe? But we don't know about that either. But anyway, I'm going to use the lingua franca of Europe. Let me try and, I've got 10 minutes. I understand that representatives of the Hungarian government are in the House. I welcome their presence here. I hope we'll have a discussion about things. I think I need to do two things. I need to talk about who we are. I need to talk about what happened to us. And I need to talk to you about what's at stake. So who are we? I mean, first of all, we're a graduate institution in the social sciences and humanities. We have about 1,500 students. They come from 120 countries around the world. It's a global university. We've been in Budapest for 25 years. Budapest is our home. We're not passing through. It's where we live. It's a city we love. We're proud to be a part of Hungarian academic life, and of all the forms of support that my university has received in the last month, the support that matters most to us is coming from the Hungarian Academy of Science, from ELTE, from Corvinus, from the great institutions of Hungarian academic life. And we feel deeply part of one of the great intellectual traditions in Europe. I think anybody who thinks about what Budapest and Hungary have contributed to the intellectual life of Europe in the 20th century knows what I'm talking about. Artists, musicians, physicists, chemists, mathematicians, the incredible creativity of that artistic and cultural and intellectual tradition is something we take deep pride in being a tiny part of. And so our identity is that we are a Hungarian institution and an American institution. We're like a person who has one identity but two passports. We have a Hungarian passport, or we did until the end of March, and we've got an American passport. And now they want to take the Hungarian passport away. We're one university. We're not two universities. We're one university. We employ about 600 people. 40% of them are Hungarian nationals. We teach a couple hundred wonderful Hungarian students every year. We have CEU graduates in the current government. We have CEU graduates in the civil service of Hungary. We're proud of the contribution we've made to the country, and all we want to do is continue making that contribution. We are not a political institution. We're not an NGO. We're an actual university. You know what that means? We get up and do really exciting things like medieval history, microeconomics, analytical philosophy, right? That's what we do every day. The same way the Université libre de Bruxelles, the Vrije University does. We do what universities do. And the core of our appeal is to leave us the hell alone. Let us do what universities do. Okay, so what happened? That's who we are. So what happened? On the 28th of March, with no consultation, no warning of any kind, the government of Hungary tabled legislation which has a number of elements that need to be understood. First of all, it said the legislation exempts all countries that send institutions from the EU, so it exempts the EU. It defines a category of institutions who belong to the OECD. Guess what, who's in that set? Not many universities, there's really one in the set, okay? So it's legislation targeted at one university. Secondly, it says if you're going to operate in Hungary, you have to have a bilateral international agreement between the government of Hungary and the state in which you have your base. And that means actually they're looking for a binding international agreement with the United States of America. I don't want to get fancy with you about this, but there's a constitutional problem. The United States of America has no jurisdiction in higher education. The licensing authorities for this are actually the states. So we'd be happy to have a bilateral international agreement between the state of New York and the government of Hungary. We already have one, as it happens. It was signed in 2004 between the governor of New York and the then Prime Minister of Hungary. And it's subsequent to that act that we've been in Hungary happily, without problems ever since, in full compliance with the law. One of the other things that has been said is that we're kind of play fast and loose with Hungarian law. Excuse me. We've been scrupulously compliant because we respect Hungarian law, we respect Hungarian regulations, and we've been told by the Education Department, you're in perfect conformity with the law. So, the next element of this legislation is that we have to have a campus in the United States. There are 30 American universities overseas. Think the American University in Cairo, think the American University in Beirut, think the American University in Central Asia, who do not have campuses in the United States. We're not exceptional, we're entirely typical of the ways in which American education works overseas. In addition, we're not allowed to have this double identity, the Hungarian identity, the American identity. They want us to choose between one identity. They're saying, you can stay here provided you don't hand out American degrees, master's and PhD degrees. We're saying, excuse me, we're one university. You can't split us in two. We're one person with two passports. We want to keep both passports. The other thing that they are requiring is that for years and years we had the standard European-wide exemption for non-EU nationals, I'm a Canadian, to practice and work in the institution. We didn't have to have a work permit. Now they want a work permit. Guess what they want a work permit for? So they can decide who we can hire. This is why this is an issue about academic freedom. When you go into the fine detail, folks, this is a straight, direct attack on academic freedom of an institution that is a high-quality university that is proud to be a partner of universities like this and, to repeat, wants to be left alone. Okay? That's our position. Since this legislation was tabled on the March 28th, we've had no consultation whatever with the Hungarian government. The legislation was rammed through Parliament, and then it was signed by the President. We've launched a constitutional challenge. Do you know what the basis of the constitutional challenge is? It's because if you look in the basic law of Hungary, a law that we respect, it seems to me, a lot more than the Hungarian government, it gives very clear and explicit guarantees of academic freedom. And it's on that basis that we're launching a constitutional challenge. Okay, so that's where we are. We're in a constitutional challenge to legislation that we regard as a violation of basic Hungarian law and discriminatory against an institution that wants to do nothing else than go back and be a university. What's at stake? What's at stake is academic freedom. And let me be frank with you, I've been in universities all my life, but it wasn't until about a month ago I began to think about what academic freedom was. I'll be frank with you, I used to think it was all about tenure. It was all about, academic freedom was a set of privileges for tenured professors. You couldn't fire them, and that's what it meant to be free. You couldn't be fired. Right? One of the things that this whole thing has focused for me is how diminished our conception of academic freedom has become if it becomes a discussion about the privileges of professors. What academic freedom is, very simply, is the right of a free institution to govern itself within the law, right? One of the oldest traditions of European freedom, remember, is held by universities. Universities were some of the first self-governing institutions in Europe. Think about the University of Bologna, think about Oxford, think about Cambridge, think about some of the great universities, Paris, the Sorbonne. These are universities that from the very beginning govern themselves as a community of scholars. Remember that phrase, a community of scholars? A community of scholars is not a community unless it's self-governing, unless it has the freedom to govern itself. And what does that mean? It means the freedom to teach what you want, to hire who you want, recruit who you want. The freedoms here are not abstract, they're very, very specific. And unless a university has them, it cannot be free. I'm a liberal, remember? I love compromise. I'll split the difference on almost anything, folks. But you can't compromise about academic freedom. It's like pregnancy. You either have it or you don't, okay? And this is why it's a fundamental issue. We have been anxious to have dialogue with the Hungarian government about this. There are all kinds of ways, if good faith was shown, in which we could easily find a solution to this problem, provided I'm not asked to trade away the academic freedom of an institution that I've been fighting for and that I care about. Now, the issue about academic freedom is, let's go to another more controversial issue. The government says this is actually about Mr. Soros. Now, notice something important about this. I'm proud of the fact that Mr. Soros gave the endowment that made the university's independence possible. We've got an endowment, unlike many universities that get all their funding from the state, we get our revenues from tuition, and we get it from revenue from an endowment. One of the important facts about CEU to remember is that academic freedom faces both ways. I have to be independent of the state, and I have to be independent of my founder. I don't take orders from George Soros. I am accountable to 21 trustees of the university. Do you know who those universities are? Oxford, Berkeley, Stanford, Columbia. These are 4 universities, either presidents, ex-presidents, or actual chancellors, who are on the board as a guarantee of the independence of this institution both ways, from Mr. Soros on the one hand and from the government of Hungary or any other government for that matter. That's what we have to understand about academic freedom. It is a tough master. I have to be independent in both senses of the word, and I can look everyone in the eye and tell you that I am, okay? This is why this is a fundamental issue. This is why we all, many of you are teachers, many of you are professors. One of the things that I hope will come out of this evening is that you come as students, as teachers, as professors, as administrators, and think hard about what academic freedom means to you. Because I'll tell you, in the last month, I've certainly learned what it means to me and what it means to my university. A final point, and then I'll stop. Some people in my university define this as an existential crisis in which our existence is at risk. Let me make another point perfectly clear. Our existence is not at risk. Under no circumstances whatever will CEU close. Under all circumstances, it will remain open and serve its students and serve its faculty and serve the city of Budapest. Okay? That needs to be extremely clear. Whatever the government decides to do, whatever they try on us, this university will remain open and continue the full continuity of its academic programs in master's and doctoral training. So, what it is how a university survives a politically motivated attack. I'm not here to comment on what Mr. Orban's agenda might be. I actually have very little interest in Mr. Orban's political agenda. My point is much simpler than that. Don't take free institutions hostage to serve political agendas. I don't care what they are. Leave us the hell alone. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ignatieff. Just to explain how we're going to organize the choreography of the evening. I mean, first I will ask just one question to Mr. Ignatieff, but then I will turn to the rectors of the VUB and the ULB. And then we will have a discussion, interaction with you. Of course, you will be able to file questions to the persons on the panel. Just one question. What are the legal recourses you have to fight that new legislation?
Well, first of all, we've launched a constitutional challenge, or we've been, opposition parties, we have no connection with the opposition parties, but they've launched a constitutional challenge, and we will do, law students in the audience will perk up, we're going to submit an amicus curiae brief in support of constitutional challenge. As I say, the grounds are simply that we believe it's in violation of Hungary's basic law. We also believe it's discriminatory against CEU. We think, in fact, that the resolution of this will not be legal, it'll be political. I mean, that what we need to do is sit down and talk to the president of the country has asked for there to be negotiations, or, you know, I'm giving these fiery speeches, folks, but I swear to you, I don't want to be doing this. I actually want to get this off the table, out of the headlines, and into a small room where we do the business of figuring out how we continue. Because to repeat, my objectives are very clear. It's not to mount a political challenge to this government in any way, shape, or form. It's to defend an institution so we can all go back to work, right? And the solution to that, because I have been in politics, is you get in a room and you work it out. And we've been clear that that's what we want, and we're waiting for the other side to respond, and if they do, fine. That it seems to me, is how we do it. But every day that goes on, a university has to keep living. It has to accept students every day. It has to, you know, people come for job interviews, and we got to keep the show on the road, and we're doing that. But and we. You know, I use this platform, I use every platform I've got to tell the Hungarian government to just designate someone with the authority to sit down with us and talk this problem through. We are part and parcel of Hungarian academic life. We will not be pushed out, so let's figure out how we find a solution.
The VUB and ULB have been very quick in taking up a position of support for the CEU. Caroline Pauwels, I mean, how do you see the capacity of our university, like VUB, but also like the ULB, of course, and I will ask some question to Mr. Englert. How do you see the capacity of our universities here to defend the CEU case and make sure that it can continue its work in Budapest without being affected by political power, if I may say? So how can you imagine the capacity of university? People tend to say press freedom groups are very well organized and academics are not really well organized in the same way. How do you say that? I mean,
okay, so first of all, I want to thank you for the passionate speech also about defending something we all cherish. And I also think it is important that we have this debate and that you came to Brussels, because it is indeed our expectations, I think, to in the heart of the capital of Europe, where decisions are made, where things need to be defended, that sometimes we lack this courage also to speak out for what we really need to speak of. You say we do not really want to be here and we want to get back to work. I think none of us really expected that we needed to do this in such a short period. And I see many dangers. I agree that perhaps we are not in an existential crisis, yet I would also perhaps will speak of an existential crisis, because I see more dangers to academic freedom than just this thing that happened in Hungary and unfortunately to CEU. But the thing we for me, and I want to, of course, engage in the dialogue as well, is what can we do? We try to have this debate where I think we need to really engage more people to stand for this academic freedom, that we do not think it is self-evident today, because it's not any longer, I think. I truly think that it's over, and that we will have to stand strong, and we can only stand strong if we stand united, because the attacks are multiple, I think, and you were talking about 650 universities who sign letters, about 70,000 people out in the streets of Hungary, yet I think we do not speak enough already about what happened in Hungary. I think we need to engage more. I think we need to speak out also to our governments, because what happens here is just like not so many kilometers away from Brussels. And so I would love to hear what we can do in order to be stronger and defend the whole case stronger than we do today. And that every occasion that we have to talk about freedom, that we take it. And we have another event coming up on May 3rd, defending freedom of expression. This is the same battle, I think, and we should take this opportunity. So I would ask the rector also to say, okay, what can we do as both universities, except having a debate in a nice setting and with nice people all defending the same cause, but we have to defend others, or we have to convince others about this cause.
Well, we've had magnificent support from universities around the world, and I think the mailbox of the Prime Minister and the Education Minister have been quite full recently, and I hope those letters have been respectful but clear about international feeling on this issue. I think it's very important to express solidarity with other Hungarian academic institutions. We've not organized their resistance. We're not, it's not a political campaign, but I think that it's important for European universities to recognize their kinship and solidarity with Hungarian academic institutions in general. I think it's helpful to talk to European parliamentarians. I think it's important to talk to heads of government. I think it's important for anybody in the audience who wants to express a respectful letter to the Hungarian government, but also to their heads of state and their education ministers in their home countries. That is welcome. But most of all, I think what I said earlier is what I believe. The thing about values is that they are quickly vitiated when they become blah, blah, blah. When you use a phrase like academic freedom and you actually don't know what it means in any detail. It's just something that comes out of your mouth. And I think one of the purposes of this meeting for me and every time I talk is just to get us to think about this. Why it matters. What is the connection between academic freedom and democratic freedom? As I said, when I talk about academic freedom, a lot of people who haven't had the advantage of a university education, for example, think, oh, that's just a privilege for professors. It's just so you can't get fired. And I'm trying to get a conversation going about the nature of academic freedom to deepen its connection to democratic freedoms in general. And I think that one of the things that has been very illuminating to me has been, if you have 70,000 people in Parliament Square in Budapest, I wasn't there, but I saw the pictures. These are people with an instinctive sense that there is a connection, a visceral connection, between free institutions and a free society. And I think it's that discussion, because universities get isolated, they get regarded as being an ivory tower apart from society. Freedom, all forms of freedom in this world, our freedom as citizens, but our freedom as institutions, go with deep responsibilities. I mean, all our universities, I'm sure your university, my university, feels a deep obligation to serve the community as well as we can. I mean, to make our research useful, to help solve public problems, to educate public servants, to educate citizens so that they have those values. So academic freedom carries with it a connection to democratic freedom, but it also carries forward a responsibility of the society itself. And I think, let's be honest, the general public Often the public that votes for populist parties is very hostile to universities because they think it's just another island of, privilege. And I think we have a very important role to go out and say, no, we're trying to be good citizens ourselves. We have some responsibilities. We take those seriously. How can we help? How can we be better citizens ourselves? I think all of this is the larger context that we need to think about, because there's simply no doubt that right around the world, academic freedom is in question as never before. And we will not defend it well if we don't interrogate it ourselves in a critical and careful and thoughtful manner.
Mr. Englert, do you think that the European institutions, should be expected to do something about the case? They will certainly pretend they have not the prerogative to intervene in issues of education. They have been very wary when it came to the issue of our press freedom a couple of years ago. They were very cautious in the way they addressed the issue. Do you think that we can expect from the European Union and the university should be working strongly at the Parlement or the Council, to make sure that they take a stand?
I think it's part of our duty in relation to the society, but also that the question of the academic freedom in the university should be understood as a fundamental necessity to run correctly a university. It's a long tradition. If you go very far in the past, university had privileges of some extraterritoriality, even for the cities in front of the city where they were hosted. And this is fundamental because one of the roles of the universities is to explore new thoughts, new mechanisms, and then fundamentally to confront the dominant idea of a time. So to restrain this possibility is not only threatening one of the partners of a social dynamic and of a network of citizens, it's also threatening the fundamental mechanism on which the university are built. Sometime, and we discussed, Caroline and I, about what we could do, we think we're not very powerful. And I think that's true, and that's not the problem. The problem is not to be powerful. No, we are not in charge to solve the problem. What we are in charge is to put it on the table and to express, and I think one of the words you use is extremely important, the solidarity. The fact that the university is inside of a interpersonal and interstructure of the society dynamics in which we take our place. And I think it's very important, not only for CEU and for Hungary, but also for ourselves, to stand up and take the word, even if it's not very powerful. Now, and I understand certainly the position of the rector to say he do not want to enter a political debate and be left alone. But we cannot ignore that this event occurs in a very perturbated time. First, it's not an isolated problem within the Hungarian society, that we have been aware of many problems these last years with the refugees, with the press, and the risk of seeing each of the problems as isolated is not understanding the dynamics, the general dynamic in which this problem occurs. The other reasons why it's certainly extremely worrying is that we are inside of the European Union. This is not occurring anywhere in the world. It's occurring within our community of values, of citizenship, in a moment this common union is also in a threat situation. So this is another reason to be extremely strongly reacting to the situation and to understand that the way we handle this kind of problems has consequences which are much larger than just solving the university problem. The third reason for which I think this has larger consequences is that we are facing, and the rector said that, a more larger attack on truth, on university, on science, on examining the facts and expressing views that can be conflicting. I'm sure we would not have been agreeing on many things, and this is one of the reasons why I'm proud also to take the world. It's because we could have disagreement, but I think it's important this disagreement could be discussed in a safe environment, which is the way university can contribute to the society. It has been a lot discussed today as the post-truth way of handling facts in our new world, was being moving in the last 2 or 3 years tremendously. And I see the European Union space as a major and powerful geographic space to protect these values, where I think they are most able to be protected in a lot of other places in the world. So our solidarity is very strong. We know that the biggest risk for the freedom is not to use it. La liberté s'use quand on ne l'utilise pas. And so I'm not very worrying about the fact that we are powerful or not in what we can do. I think our role is to stand up and try to be with many other citizens in many different fields. We speak about ONGs, we speak about the press, we speak about respecting the reality of the facts and making the difference between the facts and the interpretation, who can be in a large variability. And not to forget that variability is a very important way to adapt to the world. And it is true for biology, but it's also true for thoughts, it's also true for citizenship and society. So I think the fact that we are here at the center of the European Union, and I thank the 2 institutions of European studies to have taken the initiative to address the 2 rectors the request to organize this moment, because I think that the fact that we are at the center of the European Union institution gives us a special responsibility, and I'm very happy to have hosted you for all these reasons, and I hope that the situation will be solved, but will be solved in putting in front the principle that make us able to resist to the world who is moving today in in a direction we think is not the one that could give to the most part of the citizen of this planet safety, hope, and confidence in the future.
But concretely, as we are in Brussels, precisely with the European institutions, but concretely, what do you expect from the European Union? You mentioned the European Parliament. It's a great institution. There have been reports, there have been hearings, there have been denunciations of the state of things in Hungary, for instance, from Louis Michel, for instance, the former liberal foreign minister, from Rita Tavares, from the Green Party in Portugal, who produced reports that were quite strong on Hungary, but yes, it fizzled out. I mean, nothing happened. And the European Commission said we don't have, apart from the infringement proceeding, we don't have any competence to go further. What do you concretely expect today in a realpolitik world of power versus power? I mean, really, not just principles versus power. What do you expect the EU to do? I mean, concretely, what are you going to say if you meet with commissioners and people of the council where power is?
Well, we've had, I'm in Brussels to talk to you and be part of this, but I've also been talking to commissioners and to European parliamentarians. What do I want? I want one word. I want action. Talk is cheap. It'd be good to have action, but it isn't. It's not. My job is not to demand a course of action. And my job is to frame the issue and get people to understand why this is a serious issue. And it's serious because this would be the first time in Europe since the Second World War that a member state actually tried to shut down a free institution that's been in conformity to the law, that has a respectable international and domestic reputation, has no other desire than to continue to work and serve in Hungary. It would be the first time a European member state had shut down a free institution like this. And I just think this puts in deep question the European project, European values, but it also raises a fundamental question, which is not for me, but it's for the Hungarian people, which is their place in Europe. I mean, that's, and these are, I'm not a citizen of Hungary. It's, I'm married to a Hungarian and been part and parcel of Hungarian life for 20 years, but I know I'm not a citizen, so it's not for me. Hungarians are going to have to make these big decisions about what kind of place they want to be in Hungary. All I know is that they're in a certain position on the map and that they've made an incredible contribution to European culture since forever. I'm hopeful that the European Commission and the EPP and European parliamentarians will say, guys, let's get back on track here. Mm-hmm. I don't care how they do it. It's not my job to figure out what the political response should be. That's the responsibility of elected politicians, and I hope they will take their responsibilities seriously. And so I go around, I talk to people and tell them what I think, and I hope we'll get a good response. In fact, I come out at the end of this day cautiously optimistic. Is that?
So this is the first time that there is such an initiative taken by a EU government against an academic institution. Are there, in Europe, are there worries concerning academic freedom? Are there that are perhaps different from what's happening in Hungary? But as rectors of universities, you are following very closely the situation of academic freedom everywhere, but also in Europe. Are there other worries, concerning the state of academic freedom more broadly within the EU? We can mention after that Turkey and other countries in broader Europe, but in the European Union, are you receiving signals from colleagues that some academics or institutions are under pressure in different ways than what we see in Hungary?
Yes, I think we do, perhaps increasingly so on a daily basis, if I may say so. What I see is first something very fundamental, the questioning of a free institution, and just the suggestion that we could eventually close it, that's quite fundamental. But what we also see today is that academics, for example, from the United States, need to transfer their data to Europe because they are scared that the government would eventually, in this denial, for example, just to name one, climate change consequences, that they do not trust the situation anymore, so that they are now called to transfer their data to Europe in order to preserve them to some extent for, again, free research. I see this as a danger, and this is what is actually happening. On the other hand, we see that mobility, be it from students or from researchers, is also threatened. We have researchers today, and again, this is daily business, who say they, and you already mentioned Turkey, but that they can't get into Turkey anymore because they do research on, for example, the Kurdish situation, which again is a threat to academic freedom. The same goes for the mobility of the students. They are confronted with the same dangers of not having an Erasmus to some countries, because to some extent we feel that their security is at stake, be it right or wrong. We cannot really assess for the moment. The other way around, we have researchers who were not given access to the United States because they have a name that sounds as coming from a state that they do not want to give access to the United States. So I also see the danger of in academia of self-censorship, that you at some point do not dare to speak out anymore because of indeed feeling that those freedoms are fundamentally at stake, and so that you start, in fact, not saying the things you are willing to say. And I see threats of, so I see multiple threats, but I'm an optimistic, and if you are still very cautiously optimistic at the end of the day, I do not want to spoil your day. But I also see we want to be independent from many things. We want to be independent from industry, we want to be independent from government. We really want two things that are safeguarded. That is, one, the ability to think for yourself. This is education, so that people at some point indeed gain self-confidence, that they are able to think for themselves and express themselves, even if this opinion goes against the strain. And we also want to think the unthinkable. That's research. That's the things, the risk you take sometimes when you discover things that perhaps are difficult also to treat ethically, probably. But still, those two fundamental things is what we do at university: teach our students how to think, and also to teach ourselves how to think for ourselves. This is Poincaré. But also to do the research and to think the unthinkable, even if it goes beyond the limits of imagination. And I think these things, for all the reasons I gave, and I see others, I see that academic freedom today is at stake. And again, we are newly appointed rectors, and I didn't think that it would go so fast, that we would be sitting here and feel the necessity to sit here, and also to have the obligation for solidarity reasons, as Yvon just said. I was not expecting this at such a fast pace, indeed. Just taking office like 6 months ago.
Mr. Englert, what are for you the major threats against press, against academic freedom? I say press freedom because I'm obsessed with journalism. But academic freedom, what are for you the major threats, especially, I mean, within the European Union? We will speak afterwards on the global situation, but today, what are the threats you see to academic freedom apart from the Hungarian case? Do you share the concerns expressed by Caroline Pauwels?
I think that another threat is due to the evolution of our world around the financing of the university and of the academic research. There are many many ways to be threatened. We have here an example of political rules, but there is also a very acute question in most of our countries about how do you finance universities, how do you protect the access of students to knowledge, and this is our world reality. So the importance of academic freedom is to have a space where all these questions can be discussed, handled in a controversial way, but to contribute to the society debate about where do we want to go, where is our society going. And there is no possible compromise about that, the protection of that space. I was in the last months a couple of times in Greece, where the economic situation put an enormous threat on the university, on the education system, and into brackets on the healthcare system, which is also, I think, EU very important value. So all these realities of our world need to be put on the table and discussed. And that's why I think academic freedom is one of the bases of the possibility to handle the everyday problem of our society in a very moving world where many things are changing, and we have to adapt to that, but also to try to stay at the decision of our future.
Thank you. Now I'll turn to the audience, and I'm sure you have questions to raise. But first, I'd invite the ambassador of Hungary to make a presentation and sort of write a reply to what has been said up to now. So I don't know where the ambassador is, but okay, please, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Can I speak from here?
Yes, of course.
We won't expect the presentation. I would just say a few words after the three very distinguished speakers, and I'm really humbled to have the floor after these three presentations. In actual fact, I have my first-hand experiences with the ULB, because last year, exactly a year ago, I was a guest here at the International Relations faculty, and I addressed some 60 students about Hungary's policies within the European Union, migration crisis, Hungarian economic successes, etc. It was a very lively discussion with very knowledgeable students, great professors, and it was not easy, but I think it was mutually beneficial for us, the representatives of the Hungarian government here in Brussels, and also for the students. From this humble point of view, let me make a few remarks, 3+1 points, in the spirit of the old Latin proverb, audiator et altera pars, and I really appreciate the opportunity to say from the audience. My first point is that having listened to the presentation of the rector of the Central European University and reading Belgian or Luxembourg press, one might have the impression that there is a crusade by the Hungarian government against the Central European University, or more in general, against all institutions supported by George Soros. In actual fact, the Hungarian government has some disagreements with George Soros, for example, in the context of the migration crisis. But I can assure you, Mr. Rector and the audience, that my government doesn't consider the CEU as a battlefield for the discussions with George Soros. And it's certainly not a political vendetta against his institution. In fact, what prompted the amendment of the legislation was a thorough study, an investigation of the Hungarian Authority of Higher Education, which investigated the all 28 foreign universities operating in Hungary at the end of 2016. And this investigation revealed quite serious irregularities in not less than 27 universities, including the CEU. For example, in the case of the CEU, there were problems with program accreditation, with the registration of some 17 programs, and the provision of information to the Hungarian authorities. These are not unlawful activities, these are irregular activities, and I'm very careful in choosing my words. And in our view, we agree that the CEU is one of the most respectable education institutions in the whole Central European region. But in my government's view, this excellence should go hand in hand with complying with the existing rules which have been in place, which have been applicable and known to everyone for years. That's point number one. Point number two is that this is certainly not a direct attack against academic freedom. What we are doing is creating a level playing field for the foreign universities. What is this amendment of the existing Hungarian legislation all about? There are two rather controversial rules. According to one of them, a foreign education institution can function and issue a degree in Hungary if the institution and its diploma are lawfully recognized in the country of origin, in that case the United States, or in lack of a campus in the United States, there is a need for an international agreement. It doesn't stipulate that it must be an intergovernmental agreement. It just says that there's a need for an international agreement. In other words, if the Central European University doesn't have a campus in the United States, or there is no international agreement on the functioning of the university in Hungary, the university cannot issue two diplomas, which is right now the case, both an American and a Hungarian diploma. And the objective of the legislator was to create a level playing field for all foreign universities. If there is no campus in the country of origin, then there can only be a Hungarian diploma issued. But again, there is another condition with which it can be remedied, an international agreement, and the Hungarian government is ready to conduct talks about an international agreement. By the way, two small comments on this. There is another American college, it's called the McDaniel College, another American institution, an American institution with a liberal attitude, and this college has fulfilled all criteria which are stipulated in the law. So there is no problem whatsoever with the functioning of this university. The other point of reference which I wanted to mention to this audience is that the Dutch Parliament, the two chambers of the Dutch Parliament, adopted a few months ago an amendment to the Dutch Higher Education Act, and it has basically the same provisions for the functioning of foreign institutions. If you are interested in reading that Higher Education Act in the Netherlands, it will come into force on the 1st of June, and the respective article is Article 1.22, and you will find basically the same provisions, and there is no outrage against the academic freedom in the Netherlands, and I think with the on the same standing, there should be no outrage about the violation of academic freedom in Hungary. And this is my last point, that my government doesn't want to shut the Central European University. And in our view, what is at stake is not academic freedom. What is at stake is a level playing field. What is at stake is whether the Central European University can issue 2 different diplomas. There are some conditions which must be fulfilled. My government is ready to work with the Central European University to fulfill these criteria. And let me just make this +1 comment, because there were references about the broader context, the European context, that we are ultimately operating as a member of the European Union. I want just to recall that since 2010, 2011, there were a number of cases when the European Commission actually took action, because there were some references also from the speakers about a lack of action by the European Union. Actually, there was action by the European Union. Hungary was on a number of occasions subject to infringement procedures. By the way, Hungary is not an exception in this regard. European Union member states are routinely subject to infringement procedures. Hungary is not better, not worse than the average of the European Union in that regard. And I can also tell you that whenever we had infringement procedures against Hungary in the past couple of years, all these procedures were brought to a reassuring conclusion, either by Hungary voluntarily adjusting its legislation to the requirements of the European Commission, or at the end of the procedure, finally we complied with the decisions, sentences of the European Court of Justice, as is routinely the case within the European Union. So as in the past, we stand ready to face these procedures. We have nothing to fear, we have nothing to hide, and my government is ready to work with you, Mr. Rector, to fulfill all these criteria. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm really grateful for this. I hope I didn't consume too much of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Mr. Ignatieff to react to the reaction.
Well, it's I'm grateful for the ambassador's presence and for his comments. All I can say is it'd be better if we weren't in this room and we were doing this in Budapest. Send a message to your guys back home, okay? I meant that honestly, Ambassador. I respect your functions. I'm just saying what you're saying and what other government spokesmen are not well aligned. What you're saying and what is being said to us in Budapest is not well aligned. Just this morning, your government informed us officially that the International, the member of your Hungarian Foreign Ministry, who's been designated to deal with this issue, has told us formally they don't want to talk to us. They'll only talk to the United States government. So there's an issue here, and I'm saying respectfully, get your act together, designate a negotiator. Let's take this out of this kind of environment and get in a room and sort this thing out. The other issue is you're saying your concluding remarks indicate that you're positively expecting infringement procedures. Why do you have to go there? Why don't you avoid infringement procedures? It's such an easier way to be in Europe, not infringe, and then everybody's happy. I don't get the strategy. You're telling me you're respectful about infringement procedures. Why did you get them in there in the first place? I mean, and then the only issue in which I feel mild indignation is you were very careful to say we were not unlawful, but you said we were irregular. I want to make it clear that this university takes Hungarian law very seriously. We spend a lot of effort going over to the education department whenever there's some issue about paper or some document you want. The repeated, recurrent line of the government that there are irregularities of which we are guilty is hard to reconcile with the clear written evidence, the written evidence from the education department of your government saying that we're in full and complete compliance. So get your story straight here, Ambassador. We believe firmly that we have been in compliance. We take any accusation, and it's come from the Prime Minister himself, that we're in violation of Hungarian law. It's defamatory. Let me be clear, it's defamatory towards an institution that has been part and parcel of your educational system for 25 years, takes Hungarian law seriously, and has no other desire than to contribute to the academic life of your country. So don't make loose allegations that your own department can't even justify, because it's dumb and it's playing games in the audience in ways that I simply won't accept, okay? So tell your people back home, let's get in a room and sort this stuff out. We will show you chapter and verse that we're compliant. The level playing field stuff, you're saying to me, actually you can stay in Hungary provided you don't issue foreign degrees. And we're saying you can't split this university in two. We've been issuing American degrees for 20 plus years with no problem at all. We've been under Fidesz governments, we've been under other governments, we've been under all kinds of governments and tried to comply in every case. But the key thing we must have is the capacity to issue American accredited master's and PhD degrees. And you're saying level the playing field. What that is actually saying is you can't issue American degrees in Hungary. And we're saying that's actually unacceptable. Okay? So I respect your arguments. I respect the points you made. I'm glad we're having this dialogue. I hope that we have other dialogues in Budapest. But I have to say in a couple of quite specific cases, you're making allegations or assertions about this university that are simply false.
Okay. Caroline Pauwels, I think you also wanted to express your mild indignation.
Well, of course, I cannot really go into the specificity, but what I also think is important for universities, and I think it's also important to our students that to some extent we can indeed give the degrees that we think are really also taking care of their future. And both Yvon Englert and myself, we came back from China only last week, and we were talking a lot about also this tendency towards by diplomas, so that we have joint degrees with other universities, because this is completely in line. So either you have foreign degrees assessed issued in your own country, but also that we think that this tendency towards joint diplomas is also very important, because it takes into account not only the academic freedom, but also the academic mobility of our students and our future scholars. So in that sense, I think perhaps this can go against the grain of what probably citizens of tomorrow, students and scholars of tomorrow will need, this ability to move freely and to have diplomas recognized by the whole academic community. So I think this is also for us, talking for, I think, both VUB and ULB, I hope I can do so, but this tendency is also very much core to our internationalization.
Mr. Englert?
Yes, I don't want to monopolize the micro to give the opportunity to the room to ask a few other questions. I just wanted to react on two things. First, to stress what I said just before about post-truths, saying things without putting interest to know if it's true or not. If there are irregularities, a normal answer is to go to the courts, not to change the law. That would be the first thing. Independently of the inside question, but just on a question of methodology. The second thing is if you change the law, you usually take adaptive measures for people who were before the changing of the law and who are running in the situation. You can install something new for the future, but you cannot ignore what's in the past. So I think this is not reassuring for us. One of the difficult things is that it's one of the political strategy of your government to appease threat by the European Union. And so in that sense, this is very strategically interesting for what I read since years about how the government was handling his relation with the European Union from which he is part of.
Thank you. Now, I'll try to get as much space for you because I have seen already a number of hands. So I will give the floor and then we'll take 3 questions and then can you identify yourself for reasons of civility? And then also to tell who you're addressing the question to. And I will take 3 questions, then go to the panelists and then back to the room. So I will start with the right. It's not political, it's just that I'm looking at the right. Please.
Yeah, my name is Jeffrey Harris. I'm a former official of the European Parliament, and among the very positive experiences of my work there was to run the Human Rights Union. I think we met during that time, but also to work on the enlargement of the European Union. So I observed Hungarian politics very closely in the 1990s. And whilst this is a very interesting and inspiring occasion, I find it deeply sad that the exchange that just took place between the ambassador and the rector actually took place. It reminded me of the times I used to visit Eastern Europe as a student or as an official, when you had governments which would tell you the black was white and that the Helsinki commitments were all being met and there was nothing to worry about. What is concerning about Hungary is precisely the explicit attack on the EU by the Prime Minister. It's his right to express his views, but it's also our right to take note of somebody saying that they want to establish an illiberal democracy, much to the embarrassment of Fareed Zakaria, who invented this idea as something not very welcome, but also they want to launch some kind of cultural revolution in Brussels. But anyway, having said that, my question to Mr. Director Ignatieff, you've been very cautious in being non-polemical, but you did say that from the government's point of view, or at least I understood you saying, that from the government's point of view, this is all about Soros. So in that sense, I would ask, what is it with Soros? We know him, and we know his views and his different benefactoring activities. But what is it about Soros? Because also in the United States and in the Russian Federation, his name comes up, shall we say, in certain political quarters. So maybe you could answer that question. And just to finally, having worked in the US for the last 4 years, I noticed that Freedom House, the Helsinki Commission, had hearings and discussions on Hungary, so the issue is of very, very great importance. Have you received any backing from the Congress or from the United States administration?
I'm going to change the rules. That's my right, apparently. So I will ask Michael Ignatieff to respond to this question. It will be easier, perhaps, and clearer to do that instead of taking up 2 questions. So, Mr. Ignatieff, can you respond to that?
Just an answer to the second part first. We had a letter of support from 10 United States senators, including Republicans and Democrats. We've had a statement of support from the New York delegation, which is relevant to us because we're accredited in the state of New York. We've had 3 successive statements from the United States Department of State in support of academic freedom in Hungary and expressing concern about what's happening to CEU. So we feel we've had fine support from the government of the United States at all the levels we need. And we've also been to other levels of the United States government and been assured of their support in the White House and the National Security Council. On the issue of Mr. Soros, the issue to me is, you know, the Hungarian government, you know, and has, as the ambassador said, some issues with Mr. Soros. I've made it clear that, you know, I don't take my orders from Mr. Soros. I admire him. I think he's a Hungarian patriot, actually, and I don't care who knows it. But I don't take my orders from him. And whatever problem they've got with Mr. Soros actually has strictly nothing to do with CEU, actually. Strictly nothing to do. We're an academic institution. Come and take a look. And you will see that we're a university just like the 2 rectors here run. And so my view of the Soros question is that it's, you know, if you've got a problem with Mr. Soros, fight it out with Mr. Soros, but leave us out of the crossfire.
Thank you. Second question, or step? Yeah, please.
Thank you. I'm Karen Fogg, former commission official, and I work with civil society in Europe these days. I would just like to challenge you on this title of the whole meeting as a higher education crisis. I think this is a democracy crisis in Hungary. And we've seen this over the last few years of the Hungarian government chipping away at the independence of the judiciary and the media. And what people ought to know is that this month there is a new law in the Hungarian parliament which is going to restrict or demonize NGOs which receive money from abroad. This is possibly a much more greater threat to an open society in Hungary than the challenges to the CEU. I would just like to ask Rector Ignatieff whether, first of all, if you're aware that this is perfectly understandable that you should work on protecting the CEU, but the bigger issues are to work on a strategy to prevent the slide by the Hungarian government towards its illiberal democracy. And that applies to your discussions with the European institutions. It would be very damaging, surely, if Mr. Timmermans took up the issue, well, the Commission took up the issue of academic freedom only, and to make yet another technical infringement case, and yet another pragmatic compromise with the Hungarian government in order to keep the channels open. Is it not time that a cry of alarm was issued across Belgium, across civil society, and that the PPE started to understand what it has been defending for 3 years? And that it is time for the Commission to look at this from the point of view of Article 7 and the rule of law instrument. That's my question.
Okay. Do you want to?
Well, just very briefly, whenever I get up, I once was in politics, so I speak like a politician, but I am actually an academic. I am actually the president of a university. I take all your points. I appreciate your points. It's actually not for me as a university president to frame this in any other way than is relevant to my function, disappointing as it may be to you. My job is to protect an institution that I care about, and I'm aware that there are other issues involved here. I mean, let me give you the flavor of it, because the NGO law there's a detail in the NGO law which I think a university audience needs to be aware of, which is that the NGO law designates as foreign funding competitively earned research funds. This will seem like a small detail, but if you've won a globally competitive competition for an academic research award at the European Research Council, you're feeling pretty terrific because it's a wonderful thing for a university to win. And now under this legislation, it would be designated as foreign funding. So you then carry this kind of opprobrium of receiving foreign funding from Europe, from Brussels. I mean, I can comment about that because that just seems to me a very serious mistake on the part of the drafters of this legislation. Because, so there's that kind of issue. There's an obvious connection between academic freedom and freedom of association. I don't need to draw you a map. It's a very clear connection. There are a range of issues in which Hungary is in difficulty with fundamental principles of European law, and the ambassador's reference to infringement procedures indicates that the Hungarian government is only too aware that they are courting infringement procedures on a wider frame. But I'm not in the business of running that battle. I'm in the business of narrowly fighting for the defense of my institutions, and it really is for others. It's for the European Commission to take their responsibilities. It's for European governments to take their responsibilities. It's for European parliamentarians to take their responsibilities. All I can do is point out the extent to which academic freedom is, despite what the ambassador says, at the center of this problem.
Thank you. We still have 15 minutes left before the end of this event. I mean, I would ask you to be short and sharp with your respect. So I will take questions from the left now, and then I'll go back to the center and to, please, yes.
Hello, a very short question. I'm Helen Bloom. I'm a former journalist. Could one practical step be that the university networks or the governments, you help your governments, take this case to the European Court of Justice or the Council of Europe?
Thank you. Can some of you answer, the directors? I mean, is it possible to do that? Well, it's a suggestion.
Abstention.
Abstention, okay.
No, I'm not. I have not the competence to give the answer. I think that should be explored, but I'm unable today to say if it's feasible or not.
I think at one. Just to say, I think at one point eventually it's feasible, but I think now you still look for other.
To exhaust all the...
And I think this is the right way, sitting around the table and then sort it out. And just that we do not need to do that far.
Thanks. Another question? Yes, someone down in the left side, my left side.
Thank you very much for organizing this very important event. My name is Aude Merlin from Université Libre de Bruxelles. I would like to first make a short testimony, second ask a question, and third make a proposition. My testimony is I'm a researcher on Russia and Caucasus, and I would like to say that CEU is one of the best universities where students from former Soviet Union educate. And we have this experience of sharing our analysis, of taking part in panels in international conferences when meeting Ukrainians, Russian colleagues who educated in Budapest at CEU. And if this university becomes closed, it will be a very big loss for research in this space. It leads me to a question. I think it is probably not very completely abstract from the point of view of Russian authorities that in this university the young generation from Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, Russia educates, and some of them come back to this CIS countries and sometimes occupy political functions and so on. My question is, and again, the backdrop of laws which have been adopted in Russia after 2012 concerning the law on foreign agents against NGOs which get some foreign funding. Do you see any relationship between Russian potential discontent with what is happening in the near abroad and this occurrence in Budapest very soon after what happened to the St. Petersburg European University? I would like to remind that in December the European University of St. Petersburg underwent another administrative harassment and is under threat. My third point, and I will end up, I'm sorry for being a bit long, but my third point is a proposition. What is being done with the European St. Petersburg University could maybe duplicated concerning CEU. When a university is in danger, there is a very interesting possibility to create an interactive map which shows all over the world where the academic works and where the syllabus, where the intellectual productions by academia, by academics and by graduates of this university are used in lectures, in conferences, in research seminars, and I would suggest that could be done beside the creation of a European network of asylum universities within EU, and if some academics from the CEU has to seek for academic asylum and to seek it within the EU, it will, I think, strike the minds of the people and of the media. Thank you.
Reaction, Mr. Ignatieff? No?
Well, just very briefly, I can't really comment on the connection between the state of academic freedom in Russia. I know that, or more specifically, I can't comment on the extent and degree to which the Hungarian government is learning lessons from other jurisdictions. I simply don't know. I don't actually care. I mean, I just want them to get in a room with us and fix this problem. And I don't want to throw loose attributions of causation around. Mr. Putin must be delighted by the extent to which he is given power and influence in the world that he doesn't actually exercise. And this would be an example. I do have people saying, oh, it's all Monsieur Putin's doing. It doesn't seem to me terribly respectful of the Hungarian government on the one hand, and it attributes to Mr. Putin powers that he can only wish he had. I'm very delighted, by the way, I'm not really answering your question well, but I'm delighted by the respect in which you hold the work that we've done in Russian studies. And your third point about tracing our network is beautifully put, because one of the disciplines we're proudest of at Central European University is network science, precisely. We've got some of the best mappers of networks in the world. And just notice why we have that. Because we work in close collaboration with another great Hungarian institution. The Renyi Institute is one of the greatest centers for advanced applied mathematics on earth. I mean, that's when I say we're dug into Hungarian academic life. That's what I mean. Their mathematicians teach our students. And out of this collaboration has grown a special ability in network science that would allow us precisely to do the mapping that you're describing. And if you go onto the CEU website, somewhere in there, you'll find one of our mapping exercises, which is just to map all the people who are supporting us. We got all continents except Antarctica and supporting us, and we're trying to find some penguins who will sign up.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Guy Archer. I teach here at the Free University of Brussels, but I also taught at the CEU for 18 years, and I was there in the beginning. And I just want to tell you that we could see right from the beginning how important that academic institution was and still is for students at that time coming from countries, post-communist countries, where the state of higher education was so bad. And I think that what you said, Mr. Rector, is important because I can understand that you try to limit your present action to the academic situation and to the defense of CEU and academic freedom in general. But you said at the same time that it's a matter of principle for you, and that even us academics don't take very often seriously academic freedom because we don't know what the dangers are. And I think that the important element today, and it's a question I want to ask you, is it possible for you or for us to stay at the level of simple academic freedom or defending one university, Central European University? Because what you said about illiberal democracy and what we call populism, all these governments want to have direct access to the people, and they don't want checks. And so they are the usual suspects. The press, we could see that in the electoral campaign in France, in the United States. They are the usual suspects, press, the judges, facts. And academic freedom and the universities are not in the media. They are not the usual suspects. And maybe our struggle against illiberal democracy will be tomorrow to defend academic freedom in general and make it something important in the agenda, the European agenda, and the national agendas, because it is not only about CEU, although I want to say it's my personal testimony that I deeply admired what the CEU has done and Soros has done since the beginning of the 1990s.
Thank you.
I think your remarks are very apposite, but then you have to ask the question, so what can universities do? What's our job? We can write op-eds and talk about illiberal democracy and populism and all these kinds of issues. But I actually think our obligations, and this is something I'm picking up my fellow rector said about an hour earlier, which I want to underscore, is that in a world of alternative facts, post-truth, Twitter, the kind of deluge of information that we are all subject to with these machines in our pockets, the function of a university becomes ever more important. And the function of the university is to get 500, in my case, 500 students a year, to understand what knowledge is. To understand that knowledge is hard, it's hard to find, it's hard to understand, it's hard to get hold of, but when you've got it, you've got the only reliable basis to make democratic choice. If you don't have knowledge, a democracy has no radar to guide itself to make public choice. And a university can't change the world, a university can't challenge governments. All a university can do is get up every morning and take deadly seriously the vocation of teaching young men and women what knowledge is. And if we're sufficiently serious about that, we will fulfill our functions in a free society. Because everywhere, knowledge is under bombardment. People think, I'll choose my facts, you choose your facts. I think you referred to climate change and the denial of science. We have to very stubbornly insist some things are true and some things are false, and finding the distinction between what is true is false is hard. It's hard work. And if we care about our disciplines, I'm a historian by training, if we care about those disciplines, and teach those disciplines with passion, that's the thing we can do that no other institution can do. We can't be journalists, we can't be, we can't be politicians, but we can be the custodians of the ideal that knowledge is absolutely central to democratic choice. And this is what, if you ask what I'm fighting for, is to preserve a place in a country I've got very fond of, where we get up every morning and we work really hard to tell people what knowledge is. And, that's what this is all about for me. And that's what people say, yes, we have an open society mission. Well, what is an open society mission? The open society mission is actually to teach knowledge, and a respect for knowledge. And if we do that, in my view, we've done our job. And that's too narrow a definition of a university's function for some, but that's mine. And that's the one I want to promote.
Thank you. It could serve as a conclusion to our debates of tonight. Really, it's a great reaffirmation of the principles of academia and a commitment to action. I will have to close, but I will ask two final remarks from our rectors. Where do we go from here? After all the discussions, where do we go from here to drawing from what we have said also, the contribution of the audience on what should be done to protect academic freedom, what should be in a pitch in 1 minute. It's not really an academic exercise, it's much more sort of a pitch for a startup. Where do we go from here as rector of the two universities? Caroline Pauwels, do you want to start?
Okay, yeah. So first, I think what has just been said, doing our job, training people, give them the tools to understand, to criticize, to be critical about what is happening, to enable our researchers to still do what they need to do, is to do free research, even though some people might profoundly disagree with what they are researching on. That's the first thing, so doing our job. I think what we can do in Brussels is indeed to still reach out and get this not politically framed, but still get it on the political agenda, because it is at some point also politicians that will have to do their job. And I think we will do what we are used to do. We will write, we will just follow up. And then I think we will, as far as I'm concerned, repeat the plea for academic freedom and democracy again on May 3rd, and which is the freedom of the press and freedom of the expression day since 1993, because all those freedoms, they do hold together. It starts with, again, the freedom of thinking, which of course normally you can think for yourself because you don't at some point disturb somebody if you keep your thoughts for yourself. But this is not the purpose of university. I think we should speak out and we should preserve this freedom of speech.
Thank you, Mr. Englert.
Yes, I'm not sure I can add many other things than to say that we are a piece in a dynamic that will resist if a lot of pieces are moving in the same direction, and that what we can contribute of is trying to produce good science, and it's also true for humanities, to fulfill what we think we can do, especially due to the fact that we're in the center of the European Union and support our Institute of European Studies, who are our instrument to produce knowledge oriented with the major challenges for the European Union, and also to give this kind of space to diffuse facts, information, debates. And we will, I'm sure, go on with all these contributions to the society without thinking that we have the key, because that's not true. Probably the and the key is in the hand of the Hungarian people.
Thank you. I'm really sorry that I can't continue and asking questions from the audience, really, but I try to respect the timetable. I really warmly thank Mr. Ignatieff for his presence here and his words. The explanation he gave us, I mean, really is a reminder that academic freedom in one country concerns everyone in all the countries of the European Union and beyond. I will also thank the rectors of the VUB, Caroline Pauwels, and the ULB, Mr. Englert, for hosting this event together with the Institutes of European Studies. And thank you so much for this. I guess we have shown here that the exercise of academic freedom should be something which should be enjoyed by everyone in Europe. Thank you so much for your presence and your contribution.
You're welcome.
Thank you.